Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Ready to explore something new today. It's called epistemic injustice.
Ooh, that sounds intense.
It is, actually. We often talk about power dynamics here, but this time it's about the power of knowledge, like who gets listened to, whose experiences actually matter, and whose knowledge do we as a society actually value?
Yeah, that's a big one.
It really is. And for this deep dive, we've got all sorts of sources. We've got academic articles, some firsthand accounts, even a super insightful blog post.
Wow, a real mix.
By the end of this, you'll totally get what epistemic injustice is. And trust me, you'll start to see it everywhere, maybe even in your own life. Kind of scary, but important.
Absolutely. And the thing is, this isn't just some abstract idea, philosophers debating in an ivory tower.
Right.
It's like baked into our social structures. We're talking about real harm being done to people just because their knowledge, their experiences are ignored or dismissed.
Okay, so let's break it down. What exactly does this term epistemic injustice actually mean?
Well, our sources, they define it as a wrong done to someone. But not just any wrong. It has to do with their capacity as a knower.
Capacity as a knower.
Yeah, so it means someone is harmed because they're prevented in some way from either sharing their knowledge or receiving knowledge.
Okay, that makes sense. But then there's this other term, epistemicide. One of our sources in Lovo talks about it. And that just sounds like way more intense.
Yeah, epistemicide is a whole other level. It's not just about individual harm.
Okay.
It's about the systematic erasure or destruction of entire knowledge systems.
Whoa.
So imagine an indigenous community. They have this incredible ecological knowledge built over generations, right?
Yeah.
But it's completely ignored by, say, scientists or policymakers coming in from the outside. They come in with their own expert opinions.
Right, so they're assuming they know better, basically.
Exactly. And the consequences, they're huge. Not only is that community's knowledge disregarded, but their ability to manage their resources, make their own decisions about their lives, that's totally undermined.
And that can have all sorts of knock-on effects, right? Like environmental damage, loss of culture.
It's a ripple effect, for sure. And this is just one example. There are countless others.
It's almost like silencing a whole group of people, erasing their contributions to the world.
It is, in a way. And it makes you wonder, where does this power imbalance in knowledge, where does it even come from?
That's what I was thinking. It's not random. It's got to be a result of something, some historical forces at play here.
You're spot on.
Uh-huh.
In Lovo, along with a bunch of other scholars, they point to colonialism as a major culprit.
Colonialism.
So through colonialism, this hierarchy of knowledge was established with Western systems of knowledge being, placed at the top.
Like the gold standard, essentially.
Exactly. And they were imposed on colonized people all over the world. So it wasn't just about physical domination. It was about controlling what people know, how they understand the world.
Controlling their minds, basically.
Precisely. Levo, he calls this a cognitive empire. Western ways of knowing, they were seen as superior, universal, while any other knowledge systems, indigenous ones, for example, were devalued, suppressed.
So it's like they were telling people, your way of seeing the world is wrong, ours is the only right way.
Yeah, and it can be really insidious. It's like a virus infiltrating the minds of those colonized, making them doubt their own ways of knowing. One scholar even called it an intimate enemy.
Wow, an intimate enemy. That's powerful. And so how does this legacy of colonialism, how is it still affecting us today? I mean, it's not like most of the world is still under direct colonial rule.
True, but the effects of this cognitive empire, they run deep. Even today, when we talk about global, often what we really mean is Western.
I see what you mean.
And certain types of knowledge, like scientific knowledge, are automatically given more weight than, say, traditional knowledge systems. Think about how much emphasis we put on having a degree from a Western university versus, the knowledge passed down through generations in a family or community.
It's like those traditional ways of knowing are seen as less valid or something.
Exactly. It's like there's a hierarchy and Western knowledge is always at the top.
Okay, so we're seeing this play out on a global scale. But epistemic injustice, it's not just about that, right? That global versus local dynamic. It's got to be way more pervasive than that.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere. Think about the experiences of marginalized groups. Women, people of color, LGBTQ plus individuals. Their knowledge, their perspectives are often dismissed or discounted just because of who they are. Their voices are silenced, their experiences invalidated.
Can you give us a concrete example?
Sure. Take the gender pay gap. It's not just about economics, right? It's about the devaluation of women's work, their expertise, their knowledge and contributions are often overlooked, minimized, and that leads to a difference in pay, fewer opportunities.
Yeah, that's a really clear example of how these structures, these power dynamics, actually create epistemic injustice. But I'm curious, how does this play out in social research? Like, is all research susceptible to this kind of bias?
That's a great question, and it's one that our sources actually dig into quite a bit,
Okay.
and there are definitely some different viewpoints on it.
Lay it on us. What are some of the different viewpoints in this whole debate?
Well, on the one hand, you have folks who say that all social research is inherently political.
Hmm.
The choices researchers make, like what questions they ask, their methods, even how they interpret their findings, all of it is influenced by their own backgrounds, their biases, and the power structures they operate within.
So basically, even research that seems totally neutral, it can still have unintended consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Think about research on crime rates, for example. It might seem objective on the surface,
Yeah.
but it can be used to justify policies that end up targeting certain communities, reinforcing inequalities that already exist.
Wow, that's a really good point. But I'm guessing there are other perspectives on this, right? Not everyone sees research as inherently political.
Right. Some folks acknowledge that research, even if it's not intentionally political, it can have political implications, for sure. And they argue that researchers should really strive for objectivity and neutrality
Okay.
in their methods, their analysis. But even they admit that the social and political context where the research takes place, it inevitably shapes how the research turns out, how people interpret it.
So it's like trying to walk a tightrope, trying to be objective, but also acknowledging those power dynamics that are always there.
It is. It really is. And this raises some important questions, especially for us as, consumers of research. Like, how do we even define political when it comes to research?
Hmm.
What role should the researcher's own values, their beliefs play? And maybe most importantly, who's paying for the research?
Yeah.
Because that can definitely influence what questions get asked, what answers are being sought, right?
Absolutely. This is making me realize that research isn't this neutral, objective thing.
Right.
It's tied up with power, with social structures, just like everything else.
Exactly. And that's why understanding epistemic injustice is so crucial. It helps us see those power dynamics and be more critical when we come across new information.
Yeah, it's like putting on a new pair of glasses. Suddenly you see things you never noticed before.
Perfect analogy.
Well, this has been a really thought-provoking start to our deep dive. We've defined epistemic injustice, explored its historical roots, and touched on how it shows up, like, everywhere. But
Mhm.
where do we go from here? How do we start to fight back against this injustice?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. We're going to talk about decolonizing knowledge. What does that even mean? And what can we all do to create a more just and equitable world when it comes to knowledge?
I can't wait to hear more. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll unpack those solutions and hopefully give you the tools to become a more critical and aware consumer of knowledge.
It's going to be good.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into epistemic injustice. So last time we were talking about the concept, how it's rooted in colonialism, and how it affects so much more than we might realize.
It's pretty mind-blowing, to be honest, like a real eye-opener.
It is. But now we got to figure out what we can actually do about it. How do we challenge this injustice?
Right, because what's the point of knowing about it if we don't do anything to change it, right?
Exactly. And before the break, we mentioned this idea of decolonizing knowledge.
Yeah, that sounds huge. Where do we even start with something like that?
Well, I think it starts with humility. Recognizing that the way we see the world, the knowledge systems we've been taught to value, they might not be the whole picture.
So, admitting that we don't know everything, that's a tough one for a lot of people.
It is, but it's crucial. We need to acknowledge that there are other ways of knowing, valid ways of knowing, that have been pushed aside, ignored. We have to challenge those dominant narratives, those stories we've been told, and be open to different perspectives.
So it's about unlearning some of those deeply ingrained assumptions, right? But how do we actually do that? How do we actually decenter Western knowledge?
Okay, well, one powerful example is the education system. For so long, it's been focused on Western knowledge, Western perspectives.
Right, that's what we're all taught in school.
Exactly. So decolonizing knowledge in that context would mean changing the curriculum, bringing in diverse voices, different knowledge systems.
So, like, instead of just teaching history from the European perspective, we also learn about it from the perspective of the people who were colonized.
Exactly. It's about presenting a more balanced, more nuanced understanding of history, recognizing everyone's contributions and experiences. And this applies to all fields, not just history. Science, technology, literature, art, everything.
It's like expanding the definition of what even counts as valid knowledge, right?
Exactly. Breaking down those hierarchies, recognizing that different perspectives have value.
Okay, that makes sense. So we're decentering Western knowledge. What's the next step in this whole decolonization process?
The next step is centering marginalized voices. It means actively seeking out and amplifying the knowledge and experiences of those who have been silenced, ignored, for so long.
This seems like it requires a real shift in power dynamics.
Absolutely.
It's not just about giving marginalized communities a seat at the table. It's about making sure their voices are actually heard, that their contributions are valued.
Exactly. It's about creating spaces where their knowledge and perspectives aren't just acknowledged, but are actually sought out and integrated into decision-making processes.
So instead of knowledge being extracted from those communities without their consent or any benefit to them, it's about collaboration, co-creation.
That's such a crucial distinction. It's about respecting who owns that knowledge, ensuring that they are recognized and empowered.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that knowledge isn't just something to be taken. It should be shared, co-created in a way that benefits everyone involved.
And this all ties back to epistemic injustice, right? Where knowledge is used as a tool of oppression instead of a source of empowerment.
Exactly. And that's why promoting epistemic diversity is so vital. It's about recognizing that there are multiple ways of knowing, of understanding the world, each with its own strengths and limitations.
So instead of trying to squeeze all knowledge into one dominant framework, we need to be open to different approaches, different perspectives.
Absolutely. And that means being open to learning from different cultures, different disciplines, different ways of thinking. Epistemic diversity, it not only enriches our understanding of the world, it also allows us to approach challenges in more creative, more innovative ways.
I love that. Epistemic diversity as a source of creative problem solving. But how do we translate all of this into action? How do we actually put these principles into practice?
Well, I think it starts with being more critical of the information we consume.
Okay, like what do you mean?
Like asking ourselves, who's producing this information? Whose voices are represented? Whose perspectives are missing? We need to be more discerning consumers of knowledge. Actively seek out different viewpoints. Challenge those dominant narratives we've been taught to accept.
So it's about being more mindful, curious, and willing to question things.
Exactly. And it also means holding those in power accountable. We need to demand that marginalized voices are included in decision-making processes, that their knowledge and experiences are taken seriously, that policies and practices are informed by a diversity of perspectives.
So it's not just about individual learning and unlearning, it's about systemic change.
It is. It's about pushing for policies and practices that reflect epistemic justice.
I see. And decolonizing knowledge, this isn't a one-time thing, right?
No, definitely not. It's a continuous journey of learning, unlearning, and relearning. It takes humility, open-mindedness, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions and biases.
It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking we've arrived,
Uh-huh.
that we've figured it all out. But this is a lifelong process of self-reflection and growth.
Couldn't agree more. And it's a journey worth taking. Embracing epistemic justice, it can lead to a richer, more just, and more vibrant world for all of us.
This has been so insightful. I'm really starting to see how epistemic injustice affects so many aspects of our lives and how this idea of decolonizing knowledge is so important for creating a more equitable and just world. What's next in our deep dive?
Well, in the final part, we're going to reflect on what all of this means for you, our listener.
Yep.
And we'll share some resources for further exploration, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about this idea of epistemic injustice, how it's got these deep roots in colonialism and how it's really affecting so many parts of our lives, even if we don't always realize it. And we've even started thinking about how we can challenge it, this whole idea of decolonizing knowledge.
Right, right.
So as we wrap up this episode, I think it's important to think about what this all means for us, the listeners. How do we make this personal?
That's such a good point. We've covered a lot of theory, a lot of big concepts. But the real learning, it starts when we apply these ideas to our own lives.
So how do we do that? How do we move beyond the theory and make it real for ourselves?
I think it starts with asking ourselves some tough questions, like really taking a look at our own beliefs.
Ooh, self-reflection time.
Exactly. So ask yourself, What knowledge systems, what perspectives have I been taught to value? Whose voices am I actually listening to? Whose stories am I prioritizing?
And maybe this is the hardest one. Whose voices am I missing?
Ooh, that's a big one. And it's so easy to go through life without ever really questioning these things, the
Uh-huh.
knowledge frameworks we've inherited, the stories we've been told.
It's like we're on autopilot sometimes.
Totally. And that's why this introspection is so crucial. It's realizing we all have biases, whether we like it or not, and those biases affect how we understand the world.
It's like, whoa, the lens I'm using to see the world, maybe it's a little distorted. That can be kind of scary to realize.
It can be, definitely. But you know what? It's also pretty liberating. Once we recognize our own limitations, we can actually start seeking out different perspectives, different ways of knowing.
So it's about being more open, more curious.
Exactly. Challenging those assumptions and realizing, we don't have all the answers. It's about approaching knowledge with a little more humility.
Humility, that's a good word. And this whole idea of decolonizing knowledge, it's not just about dismantling those systems of oppression out there. It's about personal growth,
Oh,
too.
absolutely. It's about becoming more open-minded, more empathetic, being willing to learn from others, from people who have different experiences than our own.
It's about understanding that knowledge, it's not some finite thing to be possessed. It's a process of discovery, of co-creation.
I love that. It's a process of discovery and co-creation. That's what it's all about. So, yeah, keep asking those tough questions, keep seeking out diverse voices, and keep pushing for a more just and equitable world, a world where everyone's knowledge is valued.
Well said. This deep dive, it's been a journey for sure. It's made me question my own assumptions and really think about how knowledge and power are intertwined.
That's what we were hoping for.
To all our listeners, thank you for joining us as we explored epistemic injustice. We hope this has sparked some curiosity, maybe inspired you to keep learning about this. There's a lot to unpack here.
And, remember, knowledge is power, but it's also a responsibility. So use it wisely. Be critical. Be open to new perspectives. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.